Tonight we celebrate one of the most important and one of the most holy days in the calendar of the Church. Holy Thursday night recognizes the introduction of the Mass, the Eucharist, and the creation of the priesthood. A little while from now, Father will wash 12 feet. Having been a washee myself once upon a time, I can assure you that those 12 feet are the cleanest feet in this church right now. And ironically, in Jesus' time, when he washed the feet of the apostles, they too were quite clean, because it was tradition at the time to wash your feet before sitting down to supper. But yet Jesus washed the feet of the apostles, just as Father will do tonight. And he will do it as a symbol. It's a symbol of the humility, the kindness, and the compassion that Jesus wants us to extend to each other. After the washing, in the Gospel, you heard Jesus say, "If I, therefore the Master and the Teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet." The washing of the feet, as I said, is a symbol. It is the service we are expected to perform in support of one another. And more often than not, there is a price to pay if you decide to wash feet. Jesus made that abundantly clear to us when in his service to us, he gave his life. I would like to offer two examples of the challenges that exist in following the teachings of Christ. And indeed, the challenges you will experience if you opt to wash feet. Some years ago, actually quite a few years ago now, my wife Gail and I were involved here at the St. Vincent de Paul Pantry and society in general. We used to visit needy cases. Needy cases were people who were in need of having rent paid or food or something that they needed assistance from the church. On one particular visit around Thanksgiving time, we visited a gentleman who clearly had some mental illness problems, and he was most grateful for what we did. I think the society paid his rent at that particular time. Shortly thereafter, at Christmas time, the group was asked to identify people who would deserve to receive a Christmas dinner. And it basically meant a 20-pound frozen turkey and some groceries. Well, we identified that man, that he would be a good candidate to receive a turkey and a dinner. And so we were given the job of delivering the dinner to him. When it came time to deliver the turkey, the 20-pound frozen turkey that I mentioned Gail was not available, so I was flying solo. I arrived at the gentleman's house with a 20-pound turkey in one bag. It was one of those old plastic Stop and Shop type bags that were pretty flimsy. Now we have paper, it's much better. And of course, some groceries. I had a tough time maneuvering the storm door. There was no bell outside, so I had to knock at the door. I propped the storm door open with my foot, and with the hand that held the turkey in the flimsy bag, I started knocking at the door. Well, of course, the flimsy bag didn't hold up very well. It gave way. And I don't know if you've ever been to a gymnasium. They have these things called dumbbells. The difference between a 20-pound dumbbell and a 20-pound turkey is that there's a handle in the middle of the dumbbell. Other than that, there is no difference. The 20-pound frozen turkey fell from the bag and collided towards earth, stopping right on my foot. Over my lifetime, I've broken enough bones that I've come up with my own idea of how you determine if indeed a bone is broken. It's very easy. If the pain subsides after the impact, the bone isn't broken. If the pain escalates, the bone is broken. The pain escalated like crazy. I hopped around outside using words that I had learned in school in Ireland years ago. It was actually after school, I didn't learn them in school. And of course, the gentleman came out and received his Christmas dinner and was rather amused at me first and then was quite grateful. A trip to the emergency room, of course, confirmed that the bone was broken. And that's a sort of a lighthearted way, well, it was lighthearted now, but it wasn't lighthearted then, of looking at the price you pay if you decide to wash feet, no pun intended. But I'd like to take a more sobering look at something that happened in our past. And that would be to look at the priests that we know who have washed feet down through the history of our faith. I've thought about many of the brave priests that we've known in the past, and I could have picked a number to use as an example that I'm going to talk about tonight. I could have picked Father Damien, a priest that dedicated his life to caring for lepers on a remote island in Hawaii. He washed the feet of others, caring for them until their death. I could have picked Father Stanley Rother, a country boy from Oklahoma who struggled at best going through the seminary, almost got kicked out because he couldn't keep up with the studies. But eventually he was ordained. He went to Guatemala, where he plowed fields, built schools, repaired trucks, said Mass, heard confessions, until 46 years of age, he died for the people he loved. I could have picked either one of those, but instead, I would like to talk about Father Maximilian Colby. I'm sure many of you know the story of Father Maximilian, a German priest who was interned in Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II. One day, the Nazis, upon discovering that somebody had escaped from their camp, were furious. They decided they were going to teach these people a lesson. They figured for that one escapee, 10 people would die. They rounded up a number of Jews that were there in the camp, until finally they came to the 10th man that they were going to pick. And he cried out to save his life because he wanted to be with his family who were also in the camp. The Jews grabbed him and pulled him forward. Suddenly this priest, unassuming man, yelled out, "Take me instead." And so they did. They took Father Maximilian Kolbe instead. And they decided that these people were to die by starvation. Now, some years ago, there was a documentary made about the life and times of Maximilian Kolbe. It had a premiere showing in the Diocese of Springfield, out in Massachusetts. And the producer of the documentary was there. He was to come to Boston at a later point that day for another showing of the movie. And it happened that myself and one other friend of mine were given the task of picking him up from Springfield and bringing him to Boston. So we talked at length about Maximilian Kolbe, needless to say, on our ride to Boston, and I learned quite a bit. He had an amazing knowledge of this great saint. Now, many of you may think that Maximilian Kolbe died from starvation like everybody else. He did not. Father Maximilian Kolbe was a young man, fit, healthy man, whereas the other 9 that were picked were much older, much more worn out from being in the prison for so long, and they all died off one by one. But Maximilian Kolbe didn't. The Nazis were quite frustrated with the fact that this man was not dying, that he was just staying alive. So they decided to inject him with carbolic acid. Cleaning fluid. They injected him with cleaning fluid, simply because he was prepared to wash the feet of others, just as Jesus had requested. Maximilian Kolbe's last minutes on this earth were agonizing. In 1982, Pope John Paul II canonized Father Kolbe. I would like to share with you a paragraph from the New York Times, dated October 2nd, 1982. The Times wrote, "The Reverend Maximilian Kolbe, the Polish priest who volunteered in Auschwitz to die instead of another man, was proclaimed a saint of the Roman Catholic Church today. Among the 150,000 people who filled St. Peter's Square for today's canonization ceremony was a haggard, tall, and gray-haired Polish peasant. At the end of the 3-hour rite, Pope John Paul II, who had presided over the ceremony, descended from the altar erected on a platform in front of the doors of St. Peter's Basilica and walked over to the man. The Pope, his face marked by emotion, embraced the old man and kissed him. The 82-year-old man was Franciszek Galanowicz, a former inmate who still had his Auschwitz camp number 5659 tattooed on his forearm. Mr. Galanicek was the man for whom Father Colby gave his life. And so, when you read about the bad priests, by all means, formulate your own opinion. And when you sit down to watch a movie such as Spotlight, formulate your own judgment. When you see what happened, the atrocities that we learn about in the newspaper and on radio programs and on newscasts, get mad, get angry, get upset at these absolute atrocities and crimes that some of these men have committed. And when you see these atrocities, you would certainly be justified in saying, I have had enough of this religion. I'm just going to walk out that door. But before you go, before you walk out that door with the intention of never returning, take a moment and spare a thought and a prayer for Father Damien, who washed feet, washed wounds, and gave his life in Hawaii for the people he loved. Before you go, say a prayer for Father Stanley, who washed feet in Guatemala, who plowed fields, heard confessions, repaired trucks, drove school buses, said Mass, until eventually he was gunned down in a field for the people he loved. Before you go, put yourself in that miserable, bone-chilling, cold prison yard of Auschwitz. Hear the cries of the poor Jewish man who faced death but wanted to live to be with his family. Be among that crowd who experienced nothing but hopelessness when suddenly this unassuming priest stepped forward and said, "Take me instead." Before you go, say a prayer for your pastor. Say a prayer for all the good priests you know, the good priests that sit in the sanctuary tonight, the men who read the same articles that you do, who watch the same news reports as you do, and who cringe every time they see them in the same way as you do. Before you go, say a prayer for a young man who sits in this sanctuary tonight. A month from now, he will be ordained a transitional deacon. A year from now, he will be ordained a priest. Christopher grew up in the time when all this stuff was being exposed. It would have been so easy for Christopher to say, "To hell with this nonsense, I'm out of here." But he didn't. Instead, he said, "Here I am, Lord. I'm prepared to wash the feet of others." All these priests would never have existed if it were not for that great sacred night that occurred 2,000 years ago. That sacred night that we as Catholics celebrate here tonight. The gospel tonight finished with a profound statement from Jesus. He said, "I have given you a model to follow, so that I have done for you, you should also do." The washing is a metaphor. The charity, the consideration, the kindness, the living your life in the way of Christ is what it's really all about.